I never thought I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office at 23 signing my life away to a man I barely knew. But here I was, my hands trembling as I stared at the marriage contract spread across the mahogany table. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows on the legal documents, making everything feel surreal and clinical. Last week's headline still burned in my memory like a brand: tech billionaire Richard Cross caught in scandal with mysterious male model. The problem was, that model wasn't me. It was my twin brother who had vanished the night before their supposed fake relationship arrangement, leaving nothing but a hastily scrawled note and debt collectors hammering at our family's door. The lawyer's office smelled of old leather and expensive coffee, a stark contrast to the cramped apartment I'd left behind that morning. I'd borrowed my only decent suit from a friend, hoping I wouldn't look completely out of place in this world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. My reflection in the polished table showed a young man trying desperately to appear composed while his entire world crumbled around him. "Just sign here, Jaden." Richard's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts, smooth and commanding like aged whiskey. I looked up to find his steel gray eyes studying me with an intensity that made my breath catch. Even stressed and facing a potential PR disaster, he looked like he'd stepped straight out of a magazine, sharp jawline that could cut glass, perfectly styled dark hair without a strand out of place, and that intimidating aura that made every person in the city either want him or want to be him. His charcoal suit probably cost more than my family's rent for 6 months. But I wasn't here to admire him or get swept up in some ridiculous fantasy. I was here because my family was drowning in debt, medical bills from my father's heart surgery, my mother's struggle to keep our small bakery afloat, and my brother's gambling debts that had finally caught up with all of us. Somehow, in the twisted logic of desperate circumstances, I'd become the solution to both our problems. The pen felt impossibly heavy in my hand, like it weighed as much as the decision I was about to make. "This is just business, right?" I whispered, hating how small and uncertain my voice sounded in the grand office. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to face. His cologne distracted me, something expensive with notes of cedar and rain, impossibly intoxicating in a way that made my head spin. My heart beat faster, and I tried to ignore the flutter of attraction that had no place in this transaction. This wasn't about desire or romance. This was about survival, pure business, he confirmed, but something flickered across his expression too quickly for me to interpret. Was it disappointment? Relief? I couldn't tell. 6 months. We play the perfect couple for the cameras and the press. Save my company's reputation from the scandal my ex tried to create, and you get enough money to clear your family's debts and disappear forever if that's what you want. His words should have been reassuring. A clear, simple arrangement with defined boundaries and expectations. Instead, they felt like ice settling in my chest, cold and final. The lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat impatiently. He'd been checking his expensive watch every few minutes, clearly having better places to be than witness whatever strange drama was unfolding in his office. The contract lay open to the signature page, official and intimidating with its legal jargon and binding clauses. I'd read through it twice, but the words had blurred together in my panic. I thought about my mother's tired eyes this morning, when she'd kissed my forehead and told me how proud she was of my sacrifice. Sacrifice, as if I was some noble hero instead of a desperate young man with no other options. I thought about the threatening letters from loan sharks, the way my father tried to hide his pain medication costs, the foreclosure notice that had arrived yesterday. This wasn't heroism. This was necessity. My signature looked shaky and uncertain on the pristine white paper, like it belonged to someone else entirely. As soon as the ink dried, Richard efficiently gathered the documents with practiced movements, already shifting into business mode. The romantic notion of marriage, even a fake one, clearly meant nothing to him. This was just another deal, another problem solved with money and contracts. "The driver will take you home," he said, his tone returning to that crisp professional cadence that probably dominated his boardroom meetings. "Tomorrow morning, you'll move into my penthouse. I'll have my assistant arrange for appropriate clothing and anything else you might need for public appearances." He paused, studying my second-hand suit with a critical eye that made me want to shrink into myself. "We'll need to work on your presentation." The casual way he said it stung more than it should have. I wasn't some project to be managed or charity case to be fixed up. But then again, wasn't that exactly what I was? His businesslike tone snapped me back to reality with brutal efficiency. This was just a transaction. Nothing more. I was a temporary solution to his problem. A placeholder he could mold into whatever image would best serve his needs. What should I tell people? I asked, standing on unsteady legs. The room felt like it was spinning slightly, whether from stress or the magnitude of what I'd just agreed to. That we've been secretly dating for months and finally decided to go public. He replied without hesitation, like he'd already rehearsed this conversation. My PR team will handle the details and coach you on the story. Just try not to say anything to anyone until then. As I walked toward the door, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else, Richard called out one more time. Jaden? When I turned back, something in his expression had softened almost imperceptibly. For just a moment, he looked less like the untouchable billionaire and more like a man carrying the weight of difficult decisions. I know this isn't ideal for either of us, but I promise I'll make this as easy as possible for you. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. Easy? Nothing about this felt easy. I just signed a contract that would change everything about my life for the next 6 months. I'd agreed to pretend to be in love with a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenient solution to his problems. What I didn't know, as I walked out of that office and into the waiting car, was that I'd just signed away my heart too. The contract might have been for 6 months, but some agreements have consequences that last much longer than anyone plans for. Sometimes the most dangerous deals are the ones where you get exactly what you thought you wanted, only to discover you'd been wanting all the wrong things. The leather seats of Richard's car were more comfortable than my bed at home, and as the city blurred past through tinted windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving my old life behind forever. Tomorrow I would wake up in a different world, playing a role I'd never auditioned for, with stakes higher than I'd ever imagined. The next morning arrived too soon, bringing with it a reality I wasn't prepared for. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning in my narrow bed for what I knew would be the last time. My small duffel bag sat packed by the door, a pathetic collection of second-hand clothes and personal items that suddenly felt inadequate for the new life I was about to step into. When the sleek black car arrived to pick me up, I felt like I was being transported to another planet entirely. The ride to Richard's building was silent except for the quiet hum of expensive machinery and the distant sounds of the city waking up around us. I pressed my forehead against the cool window and watched familiar neighborhoods give way to the gleaming towers of the financial district. Each mile felt like crossing another bridge I'd never be able to return to. When I arrived at Richard's penthouse building, the lobby alone was more impressive than any place I'd ever lived. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine reflected crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my family's annual income. The doorman nodded respectfully as I passed, and I wondered if he already knew about the arrangement or if he simply treated everyone with such professional courtesy. Standing in front of the elevator bank, I stared at the buttons for what felt like an eternity. 47 floors. I'd never been higher than the 5th floor of any building in my life. My finger hesitated over the button as doubt crashed over me in waves. What was I doing here? What had I gotten myself into? The elevator ride felt endless, my ears popping as we climbed higher and higher above the city I'd always called home. When the doors finally opened directly into Richard's penthouse, I stepped into a world that belonged in magazines, not in my reality. The space was breathtaking and intimidating in equal measure. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city sprawling below, making me feel like I was floating above the world. Everything was pristine, cold, and expensive, modern furniture in neutral tones, abstract art that probably had more zeros in its price tag than I wanted to imagine, and technology seamlessly integrated into every surface. It was beautiful, but it felt more like a museum than a home. Richard greeted me wearing a perfectly pressed suit despite being in his own home, his appearance as flawless as always. Even in this relaxed setting, he maintained that professional distance that seemed to be his default mode. "Welcome," he said, though his tone suggested this was more of a business meeting than a homecoming. He gave me a tour that felt more like a real estate showing and an introduction to my new temporary home. The kitchen was a masterpiece of stainless steel and marble that looked like it had never been used for actual cooking. The living room was spacious enough to host a small conference, with furniture arranged more for aesthetics than comfort. Everything was perfect, precisely placed and completely impersonal. When we reached the guest room that would be mine for the next 6 months, I was struck by how large it was compared to the tiny bedroom I'd shared with my brother growing up. The bed was massive, covered in luxurious linens that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. There was a walk-in closet bigger than our family's bathroom and an ensuite that featured a shower with more settings than my family's television. "This is your space," Richard said, hands clasped behind his back as he maintained careful distance. "I want this arrangement to be as comfortable as possible for both of us. You have complete privacy here." His consideration should have been reassuring, but instead it emphasized the temporary nature of my presence here. I was a guest, not a resident, and certainly not a partner. Setting my small duffel bag on the pristine white comforter, I felt like a fraud. The bag looked pathetically out of place in the elegant room, a stark reminder of the vast difference between my world and his. Everything I owned could fit in that one bag, while his closet probably contained more clothes than I'd worn in my entire life. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Beta, we're so proud of the sacrifice you're making for our family. We can never repay what you're doing for us." Reading her words, tears pricked my eyes. Sacrifice, there was that word again. If this was sacrifice, then why did my heart race every time Richard came close? Why did I find myself studying the way he moved with unconscious grace, or the way his eyes seemed to see everything while revealing nothing? That evening we shared our first dinner as roommates, though calling it sharing was generous since we barely spoke. The dining room could have seated 12 people comfortably, but we sat at opposite ends of the long table like strangers forced together by circumstance, which I supposed we were. Richard spent most of the meal focused on his phone, dealing with what I assumed were urgent business matters. I tried to eat quietly, hyper-aware of every sound I made in the oppressive silence. The food was delicious, prepared by a chef whose skills far exceeded anything I'd ever tasted, but I could barely enjoy it with the tension thick enough to cut. Suddenly he set his phone aside and looked directly at me. "Tomorrow morning, we have a photographer coming," he announced as casually as if he were discussing the weather. "We need couple photos for the press announcement. The story is that we've been secretly dating for 6 months and have finally decided to go public with our relationship." His steel gray eyes met mine across the table, and I felt that familiar electric jolt. "You'll need to be comfortable with physical contact. Nothing inappropriate, but the photos need to look authentic." Authentic. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nothing about this was authentic, yet we'd be spending the next 6 months pretending it was the most real thing in the world. "What exactly does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The thought of being photographed was terrifying enough without adding the complexity of fake intimacy. "Holding hands, standing close, looking at each other like we're—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words, "like we're in love." The way he said it, so clinical and detached, made something twist painfully in my chest. As if summoned by his words, he demonstrated by reaching across the table. When his hand accidentally brushed mine while reaching for the salt, an electric current shot through my entire body. The simple touch lasted barely a second, but it left my skin tingling and my heart racing. If I reacted this strongly to an accidental touch, how was I supposed to handle deliberate intimacy for the cameras? "Are you okay with that?" he asked, and for the first time since I'd met him, his voice carried a note of genuine concern rather than business efficiency. "I'll manage," I replied, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. That night, lying in the enormous bed that felt more like a luxury hotel than a home, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what I'd gotten myself into. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sparkled below like a carpet of stars, beautiful and distant and cold, just like the man sleeping somewhere down the hall, the man I'd agreed to pretend to love, not knowing that the pretending might become the most dangerous part of all. The sheets smelled like expensive detergent and nothing else. No warmth, no personality, no sense that anyone had ever truly lived here. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing myself in this pristine, perfect world, where everything looked beautiful but nothing felt real. I woke up before dawn, anxiety churning in my stomach like a living thing. Today was the day we'd create the fiction that would define the next 6 months of my life. The photographer would arrive soon to capture images that would convince the world Richard and I were madly in love. While the truth was we were barely acquaintances bound together by a contract and mutual desperation. Standing in the enormous shower, I let the hot water cascade over my shoulders while trying to calm my racing thoughts. How was I supposed to look convincingly in love with someone who saw me as nothing more than a business solution? I'd never been in love, not real love anyway, so how could I fake something I'd never experienced? When I emerged from my room, I found Richard already in the kitchen, looking effortlessly perfect despite the early hour. He'd traded his usual business suit for dark jeans and a crisp white button-down that somehow made him look more approachable while still maintaining that untouchable aura. His hair was perfectly styled, and I wondered if he ever had bad hair days or if even that was managed by some expensive professional. "Good morning," he said, handing me a cup of coffee that smelled like it cost more per pound than I used to spend on groceries in a week. "The photographer will be here in an hour. Before he arrives, we need to go over our story." He'd prepared like this was a business presentation, which I supposed it was. Sitting at the kitchen island, he walked me through our fictional relationship with the same attention to detail he probably brought to million-dollar deals. We'd supposedly met at a charity gala where I'd been working as a server, close enough to the truth to be believable, far enough to protect my actual identity. He'd been immediately smitten. I'd been playing hard to get, and we'd been secretly dating ever since. "The key," he explained while adjusting my shirt collar, his fingers brushing against my neck in a way that sent shivers down my spine, "is to remember we've been together for 6 months. We know each other's habits, preferences, the little details that make a relationship real." His touch was gentle, almost tender, and I found myself leaning into it before catching myself. But I could barely concentrate on his words, because every casual touch, straightening my collar, fixing my hair, adjusting my posture, sent electricity racing through my system. If I was reacting this strongly to his coaching, how would I survive actual intimate poses for the camera? When the photographer arrived with his assistant and enough equipment to stock a small studio, I felt my anxiety spike to new heights. David, the photographer, was effusive and energetic, treating this like any other high-profile shoot. He had no idea he was documenting an elaborate lie. "Oh, you two are gorgeous together," he gushed while setting up his lights. "The chemistry is absolutely electric. This is going to be stunning." Chemistry. If only he knew that what he was seeing was my desperate attempt not to melt every time Richard came within 3 feet of me. The first poses were simple. Standing together, Richard's arm around my waist, both of us smiling at the camera. But even these basic shots felt overwhelming. Richard's hand rested on the small of my back, warm and steady, and his cologne enveloped me in that familiar cedar and rain scent that was becoming dangerously addictive. I tried to focus on the camera, on the role I was playing, on anything except the way my body seemed to come alive under his touch. "Closer," David called out enthusiastically. "You're supposed to be in love, not meeting for the first time." Richard pulled me against his side, my body pressing along the length of his. Through the thin fabric of our shirts, I could feel the solid warmth of his chest, the steady rhythm of his breathing. My own breath became shallow and uneven as I struggled to maintain some semblance of composure. "Relax," he whispered in my ear, his breath tickling my skin and raising goosebumps along my arms. "It's just acting, remember." But the way his voice dropped to that intimate register, the way his lips barely brushed my ear as he spoke, felt like anything but acting. The poses became progressively more intimate. David had us facing each other, Richard's hands on my waist, mine resting against his chest. Through the fabric of his shirt, I could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady and somehow reassuring. When David instructed Richard to cup my face with his hands, I thought I might actually stop breathing. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, as his thumbs brushed lightly across my cheekbones. His steel gray eyes were fixed on mine with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade away. For a moment, I forgot about the cameras, the lights, the elaborate fiction we were constructing. All I could see was Richard looking at me like I was something precious and unexpected. "Perfect?" David's voice seemed to come from very far away. "The way you look at each other is absolutely magical. Whatever you're feeling, keep doing it." What was I feeling? My heart was racing. My skin was on fire everywhere he touched me. and I was having trouble remembering that this was all pretend. The way he was looking at me with something that looked almost like wonder couldn't possibly be acting, could it? Now let's try some candid shots, David suggested. Just move around naturally, interact like you normally would. Naturally. Nothing about this felt natural, yet somehow we fell into an easy rhythm. Richard showed me around the penthouse as if I'd never seen it before, pointing out his favorite pieces of art, the view from the windows, little details about his space that felt genuinely personal. The camera captured us laughing together, him tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, me straightening his collar in return. When David had us sit on the couch together, Richard's arm draped casually around my shoulders, I found myself relaxing against him. His body was warm and solid, and despite everything logical telling me this was just performance, I felt safe there, protected, like maybe for just a moment I could pretend this was real. That's a wrap, David announced after what felt like hours, but had probably only been 90 minutes. These are going to be absolutely stunning. You two have something really special. As the photographer and his assistant packed up their equipment, I stepped away from Richard, immediately missing the warmth of his presence. The spell that had somehow woven itself around us during the shoot began to break, reality seeping back in around the edges. Richard thanked David professionally, walking him to the elevator with the same courtesy he'd shown me that first day in the lawyer's office. But when he returned, something had shifted in his expression. The easy intimacy we'd shared in front of the camera was gone, replaced by that familiar professional distance. Good work, he said, but his voice sounded strained. You were very convincing. Convincing. The word stung, because for me it hadn't felt like convincing at all. It had felt real in a way that terrified me. Later that evening, as I stood in the kitchen getting a glass of water, I found him there again, tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, looking more human and approachable than he had any right to. The coffee maker gurgled quietly in the background, and the city lights twinkled beyond the windows like fallen stars. Want some? He offered, gesturing to the coffee he was preparing. I nodded, not trusting my voice. When he handed me the mug, our fingers brushed, and this time he didn't pull away immediately. The touch lingered, electric and warm and full of unspoken questions. Jaden, he said softly, my name sounding different in his voice than it ever had before. This is harder than I thought it would be. What's harder? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Pretending that I don't. He stopped abruptly, his jaw tightening as he seemed to catch himself before saying something he might regret. Never mind, good night. But as he walked away, I heard him pause outside my bedroom door, just for a moment, like he was fighting with himself about something. Then his footsteps continued down the hall, leaving me alone with my racing heart and the growing certainty that this arrangement was about to become much more complicated than either of us had planned. A week after our photos were published across every major news outlet, we had our first official public appearance. The charity gala for Richard's company was being held at the city's most exclusive hotel, and I found myself standing in front of the mirror in a designer tuxedo that probably cost more than my family's monthly income. Richard had it specially tailored for me, ensuring every line fit perfectly across my shoulders and chest. For the first time since this arrangement began, I actually looked like I belonged in his world. You look perfect, Richard said from behind me, adjusting his own bow tie with practiced ease. His reflection appeared next to mine in the mirror, and we made a striking pair, him with his commanding presence, and me finally looking like I deserved to stand beside him. Remember, we've been together for 6 months. We're comfortable with each other, deeply in love, and this is just another step in our relationship. The hotel ballroom was a glittering spectacle of crystal chandeliers, flowing champagne, and the city's elite in their finest attire. As we made our entrance, I felt the weight of dozens of eyes on us, photographers capturing every angle of our supposed fairy tale romance. Richard's hand rested possessively on the small of my back, guiding me through the crowd with the confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. We mingled with business associates and society figures, Richard introducing me as his partner with pride that felt surprisingly genuine. I found myself relaxing into the role, laughing at the right moments, engaging in light conversation about art and travel topics Richard had coached me on during our preparation sessions. But then I saw him across the room, and Richard's entire body went rigid beside me. Marcus Sterling stood near the bar, tall and blonde and absolutely devastating in the way that only comes from generations of good breeding and unlimited resources. He was everything I wasn't. Polished, sophisticated, born into this world of privilege and power. Even from across the room, I could feel the history between him and Richard crackling like electricity in the air. "Ignore him," Richard said quietly, his jaw tightening as he guided me in the opposite direction. But I could feel the tension radiating from his body, the way his hand pressed more firmly against my back as if anchoring himself to me. We managed to avoid Marcus for another 30 minutes, making polite conversation with investors and board members. But eventually, the inevitable confrontation came. He approached us during a lull in conversation, his smile bright and predatory. Well, Marcus said, his voice carrying that particular brand of upper-class disdain. "So this is your new acquisition, Richard?" His pale blue eyes swept over me from head to toe, taking in every detail with calculating precision. "Interesting choice. Very different from your usual type." The word different dripped with condescension, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks despite my efforts to maintain composure. He was making it clear that I didn't belong here, that I was some kind of charity case or temporary amusement. Richard's hand moved to my waist, his grip tightening possessively. "Careful, Marcus." His voice dropped to a dangerously low register that I'd never heard before. "That's my husband you're talking about." Husband. The word hit me like a physical blow, sending warmth flooding through my chest. Even though it was part of our act, hearing him claim me so definitively in front of his ex made something wild and possessive unfurl in my stomach. Marcus laughed. The sound sharp and mocking. "Oh please, Richard. We both know this is just business. A convenient arrangement to clean up that messy scandal from a few months ago." His gaze shifted to me, filled with pity that made my skin crawl. "When this whole charade runs its course, you'll be discarded just like all the others. I hope you're at least getting paid well for your performance, sweetheart." Something inside me snapped. The weeks of feeling like an outsider, of questioning my place in Richard's world, of wondering if I was just a temporary fix to a PR problem, all of it crystallized into white-hot anger. I stepped forward, my voice steady and clear despite the rage coursing through my veins. "Actually," I said, meeting Marcus's surprised gaze head-on, "I'm not here for money. I'm here because I'm in love with Richard." "Because you what?" Richard interrupted, his voice sharp with something I couldn't identify. The entire room seemed to fade away. The other guests, the music, the glittering lights, until it was just the three of us suspended in this moment of truth. "Because I love you," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I love you more than I ever thought possible, and I don't care who knows it." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's mouth had fallen open in shock. Several nearby guests had turned to stare, and I could hear the distant click of camera phones, capturing what would undoubtedly become tomorrow's headline. But all I could see was Richard staring at me like I'd just confessed to murder instead of love. His face went through a series of expressions. Shock, confusion, something that might have been hope before settling into that familiar mask of professional composure. Without a word, he grabbed my hand and began pulling me through the crowd toward the exit, leaving Marcus standing alone with his cruel smile wiped clean off his face. The ride down in the elevator was suffocating. Richard stared straight ahead, his hands still gripping mine but his face giving nothing away. I'd ruined everything. Our careful charade, his reputation, any chance we had of making this arrangement work. All of it destroyed by 3 words I should never have spoken. As we waited for the valet to bring the car around, Richard finally spoke. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "At home. Even now, after I'd potentially destroyed everything." He called it home, but as we drove through the city lights in tense silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to lose the only home I'd ever truly wanted. The paparazzi would have a field day with this. The photos, the public declaration, the dramatic exit, it was exactly the kind of story they lived for. But as I stole glances at Richard's profile in the passing streetlights, I realized I didn't care about any of that anymore. The only thing that mattered was the man sitting beside me and the growing certainty that I'd just gambled away any chance of keeping him. The silence during our drive home was suffocating, thick with unspoken words and the weight of what I'd just confessed in front of half the city's elite. Richard's driver had raised the partition without being asked, giving us privacy, but the tension in the back seat was so intense it felt like trying to breathe underwater. I kept stealing glances at Richard's profile, illuminated intermittently by passing streetlights, but his expression remained unreadable, that same professional mask he wore during business meetings. I knew I'd messed everything up. The careful arrangement we'd built, the precise public image we'd cultivated, the boundaries we'd established, all of it shattered by 3 words I hadn't meant to say. At least I hadn't meant to say them there in front of everyone, with cameras recording and his ex-boyfriend watching with vindictive satisfaction. When we finally reached the penthouse, Richard thanked the driver with his usual politeness and waited until the man had driven away before speaking. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt endless, both of us staring at the floor numbers as they climbed higher, carrying us toward what I was certain would be the end of everything. Once inside the apartment, Richard methodically removed his bow tie and jacket, hanging them with the same precision he brought to everything else. Then he turned to face me, leaning against the closed door with his arms crossed, and I felt like a defendant awaiting judgment. "Why did you say that?" he asked, quietly, his voice carefully controlled but carrying an undercurrent of something I couldn't identify. "Why did you tell everyone that you love me?" My throat felt like sandpaper. "Because it's true," I whispered, the words barely audible in the vast space of his living room. "I know it's stupid. I know this is just a business arrangement and that in 6 months I'll be gone and you'll go back to your real life. But I can't help what I feel." I forced out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. I tried to keep it professional, tried to remember that this was just a job, but somewhere along the way I started forgetting that it wasn't real. And tonight, when Marcus was standing there acting like I was nothing, like I was just some temporary convenience, I shook my head, feeling tears prick at my eyes. I couldn't let him think that. I couldn't let anyone think that what I feel for you is fake. Richard moved closer, and instinctively I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. He followed, not stopping until he was close enough that I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could smell that familiar cologne that had become synonymous with safety and desire and home. "Jaden," he said, my name falling from his lips, like a prayer. His hands came up to rest on my shoulders, warm and steady and achingly gentle. "You don't understand." What don't I understand? The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over, tracking hot paths down my cheeks. "That you can never love someone like me? That I'm just a convenient replacement for my brother? Someone disposable enough to use and discard when you're done?" "No." The word exploded from him with such force that I flinched. "You don't understand that I've been fighting this from the very beginning. You don't understand that every night I stand outside your bedroom door, wanting to knock, wanting to tell you how I feel but knowing I have no right. You don't understand that when that photographer touched you during our shoot, I wanted to break his hands." My heart stopped beating for a moment. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've been in love with you since the day you walked into that lawyer's office and signed your name next to mine," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm saying that this arrangement has been torture because every smile, every touch, every moment of supposed intimacy has been real for me while I thought it was just acting for you." His hands moved to cup my face, thumbs brushing away my tears with infinite tenderness. "I'm saying that I've been using you, taking advantage of your desperate situation to keep you close, and I hate myself for it. But I also can't bear the thought of letting you go." The confession hit me like a tidal wave, washing away every doubt and fear I'd carried since this arrangement began. "You love me," I whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "Desperately," he admitted, his forehead dropping to rest against mine. "Completely. So much that it terrifies me because I know that when this 6 months is over, you'll realize you deserve better than a man who blackmailed you into marriage." I reached up to cover his hands with mine, pressing them more firmly against my face. "Richard, I'm not going anywhere. I don't care about the contract or the arrangement or any of it. I just care about you. But the money, your family's debts, will get paid because you're a good man who keeps his promises." I interrupted, "But I'm not staying for the money. I'm staying because somewhere in this beautiful, cold apartment, I found my home. Not in the penthouse or the expensive furniture or the designer clothes. In you." For a moment we just stood there, breathing the same air, sharing the same space, finally free of the pretense that had defined our relationship. The weight of our mutual confession hung between us, transforming everything that had come before and everything that would come after. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted quietly. "I don't know how to be real instead of performing. I've been pretending for so long that I'm not sure I remember how to just be myself." "Then we'll figure it out together," I said, meaning every word. "No more contracts, no more timelines, no more pretending. Just us, figuring out what real looks like." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night, transforming his entire face and making him look years younger. "Just us," he repeated, and when he kissed me this time, it wasn't for cameras or appearances or anyone else's benefit. It was just for us, real and desperate and perfect in its honesty. Everything changed after that night. Not just between Richard and me, but in the very fabric of reality itself. When we woke up the next morning together in his bed, sunlight streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows, it felt like we'd crossed some invisible threshold into a completely different world. The same penthouse, the same city sprawling below us, but everything transformed by the simple truth that we loved each other. I woke up first, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar surroundings. Richard's bedroom was even more luxurious than the guest room I'd been using. All dark wood and rich fabrics, but what struck me most was how lived in it felt compared to the rest of the apartment. Books stacked on the nightstand, a coffee mug from yesterday morning, clothes draped over the chair by the window, small signs of the real man behind the polished public image. Richard was still asleep beside me, one arm thrown across my waist in a gesture of unconscious possession that made my heart skip. In sleep, all the sharp edges of his professional demeanor had softened, leaving behind someone who looked younger, more vulnerable, achingly beautiful in the golden morning light. When he finally stirred, his eyes opening slowly to focus on my face, his smile was like nothing I'd ever seen before, soft and genuine and completely unguarded. "Good morning, husband," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep as he pulled me closer against his chest. "Contract husband," I teased, but there was no bite to it now, just affection and the giddy joy of waking up next to someone who actually wanted me there. "Actually," he said, reaching for his phone on the nightstand, "about that." His expression grew more serious as he showed me the screen. "I called my lawyer last night after you fell asleep. We can make this real, a genuine marriage with all the legal protections and rights that come with it. No more pretending, no more time limits. Just us for as long as we both want it." The implications of what he was offering hit me like a freight train. Not just the marriage itself, but everything it represented: commitment, permanence, a future together that extended far beyond the 6-month expiration date of our original contract. Tears sprang to my eyes, but this time they were tears of joy rather than fear or frustration. "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I want that. I want all of it." The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness and adjustment. We had to navigate the media attention from the gala. My public declaration of love had indeed made headlines. But rather than the scandal we'd feared, most outlets treated it as a romantic fairy tale. The billionaire and his secret love, finally going public with their relationship. If only they knew how close to the truth that really was. More importantly, we had to learn how to be real with each other. The transition from fake relationship to genuine partnership wasn't always smooth. We'd gotten so used to performing our affection that sometimes it was hard to distinguish between what was genuine and what was habit. But gradually we found our rhythm. Richard showed me sides of himself I'd never seen during our arrangement. His dry sense of humor when he wasn't trying to be impressive. His fierce protectiveness when paparazzi got too aggressive. His surprising vulnerability when he talked about his fears of not being good enough for me. In return, I let him see past my grateful exterior to the man underneath, complete with my own insecurities and dreams and the growing confidence that came from being truly loved. 3 months later, we stood in the same lawyer's office where our journey had begun. But this time we were signing very different papers. Our real marriage certificate was simple, elegant, official. Nothing like the cold business contract that had brought us together. Richard's hand was steady as he signed his name, but I caught the slight smile that played at the corners of his mouth. "No regrets?" I asked as we left the building, legally married for the second time but in love for the first. Only that it took us so long to get here. he replied, lifting our joined hands to press a kiss to my wedding ring, a simple platinum band that matched his own. The media had a field day when we announced our renewed vows and commitment ceremony, presenting it as a romantic gesture rather than the legal formality it actually was. But for once I didn't care what the headlines said or what story they chose to tell. The only story that mattered was ours, and it was finally true. 6 months later, almost exactly a year from the day I'd first signed my name to that contract, we hosted a party to celebrate Richard's latest business acquisition. The same glittering crowd, the same expensive venue, but everything different because we were different. Marcus was there, of course. He was still part of the same social circle, still handsome and charming and completely irrelevant to my life. When he approached us during the cocktail hour, I felt Richard tense slightly beside me, an old reflex that we both recognized and dismissed. "Congratulations," Marcus said, and to his credit he seemed sincere. "You two look happy." "We are," Richard replied simply, his arms settling around my waist with casual affection rather than possessive protection. As Marcus walked away, I turned to my husband, my real husband, chosen and cherished and completely mine. "Ready for forever?" I asked, echoing the question he posed on our first real wedding night. "With you? I've been ready since the day I met you," he said, leaning down to kiss me in front of everyone, not caring who saw or what they thought. They say contract marriages never work, that relationships built on necessity rather than love are doomed from the start. But sometimes fate has other plans. Sometimes the most desperate decisions lead to the most beautiful destinations, and sometimes the best deals in life are the ones where everyone gets far more than they bargained for. Our love story might have started with signatures on legal documents, but it was written in stolen glances, gentle touches, and the gradual realization that home isn't a place, it's a person. And I'd found mine in the most unexpected way possible.